Right. I'm going to get us started.
Just got on the buggy and left.
So is everybody comfy? Everybody ready? Thank you very much. So thank you everyone for coming along to this session. So what should the priorities be for a combined rolling stock and infrastructure strategy? And I want to put the emphasis on the combined because we have had rolling stock strategies in the past, and we've heard of the RNEP. As track and training is coming together, as we hurtle towards the stand-up next year, Maggie Simpson said in a previous session, we are 1 year and 1 summer holiday away from GBR, and I want that timescale to stay in our minds as well. So I'm going to ask my esteemed panellists to introduce themselves. So what's your name and where do you come from? And your instant reflections on the question, like what should the priorities be? And from there, I'll be bringing a few questions myself, and then for the last 10-15 minutes, we'll open up Q&A to the audience as well. So please do have your best questions ready. So, starting with yourself, sir.
Oh, it's not ladies first.
It's quality.
So my name's Tim Bentley. I look after a company called Wabtec in the UK. And Wabtec's one of the big global rail technology companies with Alstom, Siemens, Hitachi, probably the 4 big ones in the world. I think the first thing to say about it is we kind of have big capital infrastructure in the country. We've got factories and we've got people in factories, and they're highly skilled people and they're engineers, and we develop apprentices. And I guess my reflection on working in the railways for a long, long time is that the engagement from a supply chain perspective to train operators or the government is a relationship of mistrust, distrust, and it's not close enough. And bringing, if there's anything, not if there's anything, but if there's an advancement that we can make with GB Rail, it's to start employing a much better dialogue between a supply chain with a whole pile of capabilities, investments in the UK, connected to brilliant technologies from across the world, and allow that to be discussed properly within the industry, and then ensure that the balance of risk when those things are discussed is right and correct, because that has a huge bearing on how successful people can be in delivering things. I'm mainly from the rolling stock side, right? And I guess I might be speaking to a lot of infrastructure people, but I think the same issues probably exist, right? We do a bit of work with Network Rail, not a lot, fortunately, just a bit. And even us, as quite a large organisation, get a set of terms and conditions from Network Rail, which is entirely disproportionate for the what should be a balance of power of risk and delivery. And they do the same thing with SMEs, right? And we have the power to say, no, we're not going to accept that. And then we just don't work together, by the way. It's not a discussion. They just say, well, no, then. An SME has a choice to take or not take that puts their business in complete risk, right? So I think is that enough to start?
Yeah, that's a really good starting point. Thank you. And
fabulous, thank you, Tim. So hi everyone, my name's Andrea Green. I'm Business Development Director for Alstom. I've spent the larger part of my career in infrastructure, so I'm quite new to rolling stock. And what I would say is that the UK, just before we get into the grumbles, has got an absolutely fantastic reputation worldwide for engineering. I talk to people across the world looking at exports. We've just commissioned and opened our Cairo monorail, which is a huge engineering achievement. And that recognition of what we do in the UK and what we achieve is really strong, and it's something that's recognised and sought after worldwide. That's something that we can all be really proud of. And I think that comes from an absolute focus on passenger experience, but also providing best value to the taxpayer through integration. So we've got a lot to be proud of, a lot that is fantastic. I think for me, as we move forward as an industry, we mustn't lose sight of passengers and the taxpayer. We spend all this time talking about structural change and what's going to happen and what that will look like, and it's going to be this panacea and it's going to be a wonderful new world. But passengers are here today and they want a great service, they want reliable trains, and they want a supply chain who really care and deliver for them. So for me, that has to be a priority. And to do that, I guess going back to your point, Lucy, we need to be more integrated. It was a shock to me coming to a rolling stock provider that historically, rolling stock contracts would have things like absolute discretion of a project manager. So if a project manager doesn't want to accept your train, he doesn't. There doesn't need to be any qualitative criteria for that. And at the same time, he can also apply damages because you're late now. So if we want to integrate the industry, we have to think about how we procure and how we buy. And going back to Tim's point, that risk is equitably distributed across the supply chain. And for those of you in infrastructure who think your contracts are hard and tough, I'm telling you now, I've seen these rolling stock contracts. It is absolutely astonishing. I thought my team were joking when I first read one. They really are that tough. And if we want rolling stock providers to behave differently and to be much more integrated and deliver on those outcomes, I think we just need to address that issue. And then we can work much more collaboratively. We don't need to be defending ourselves. We can work collaboratively for the interest of the passengers.
Yeah, thank you. Here.
Good afternoon. My name's Iain Stewart. I'll start off my... Oh, hang on. Is that better?
That's better.
That's better.
Thank you.
Iain Stewart. I'll start off my description as saying I'm a recovering former politician. Until the last election, I was an MP and chaired the Transport Select Committee. But almost 2 years ago, I was liberated in the general election. And since then, I've developed what you might call a multimodal portfolio career in transport. I do a couple of big roles in rail. I sit on the board of Transport Scotland with a particular focus on the rail side of the organisation. And I do some consultancy work for Transport UK as one of the top ownership groups. I would cite three broad areas that we need to look at, and I'm sure we'll explore the detail of this in our conversation. The first is the strategies have to be genuinely long-term. We have suffered from the tap-on, tap-off approach, feast and famine, for too long, where you have periods of wonderful growth, many orders, businesses scale up, and then there's a dearth. And we saw with Alstom, not that long ago, the problems when there was that hiatus in order. So all these strategies have to be genuinely long-term. And that will be a big change of thinking for the Treasury, but they need to have that courage to do so. The second point is that these strategies cannot exist in splendid isolation. They are all interdependent. And if I've one criticism of the current rail reform process that's going on, obviously the bill that's going through Parliament can't specify everything, but the long-term rail strategy has to come first. We need to know where we are going with our rail industry, and then everything should follow behind that. How do we get there? And I'm not sure we've got the sequence of that right. So that's the primary objective I would like to see. And then the third area, and it's building on your point, put the passenger first. And I do this as a bit of a bugbear of mine. I sit on many wonderful new trains as I travel around the network that are technologically brilliant and fast and efficient, but are very uncomfortable to travel in. So, for me, comfortable padding on the seats, align them with windows and have decent leg room. Do that, I'm happy. And I say that slightly glibly, but there's an important point. If we want to have modal shift, attract more people onto rail, we've got to make it a pleasurable experience and not just cram as many people as conceivably possible into each carriage.
Thank you. Eleanor.
Brilliant. Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor from Great Western Railway and I lead the business case and commercial development for England's first integrated track and train programme, which is working with Chiltern and East West Rail to replace our diesel trains. And I'm going to make this brief because I really want to get into the conversation properly. But for us, I'm not actually going to talk about rolling stock procurement, new trains off the shelf. I know that's an important one. But coming at this as an operator, what I really want is to see milestones for investment, which allows us actually to plan for the end of life for our most expensive asset in our fleet, which are British Rail era DMUs. We've got the most DMUs of any operator outside of those captured within live procurement. We've modelled the cost till 2040. The cost is huge. And I think it's a blind spot for the industry if we don't think about properly how we're going to invest, take a strategic, holistic approach to this, generate real value for money through efficiencies, consortiums, working with operators to really kind of gather the best possible price for the industry. And as we look to these big, heavy maintenance cycles coming up, that's what I'm worried about. So I want to see a pipeline of investment, the one that focuses on cost reduction as much as the end state, which is the new trains coming into service.
Palliative care for DMUs. That is a new phrase. I wanted to pick up on something you said, Tim, there in the opening about that relationship of mistrust and distrust and the fact that as an industry and as a supply chain, we can invest in skills. And just ahead of this session, this room was filled with school kids from primary engineer doing some amazing STEM activities. Yeah. Are we setting people up for failure? Or is there something we can change now to make sure those kids do have a good job in the future?
Well, the railway has to be a long-term view and a long-term vision of things. And the more that we insist on short-term targets, short-term measures, it doesn't allow investment in terms of apprentices and graduate engineers. We see a lot of people dropping off the end of their careers. And the pipeline coming through needs strengthening, right? Yep. The only way we can strengthen that is if we understand what the medium, long-term view of the railway is, so that companies and organisations like a Wabtec or an Alstom can then take a sensible approach to investment, both in capital infrastructure, but more importantly into people, and young people in particular. We've got 38 apprentices that we are developing in the UK right now. And they're absolutely brilliant, by the way. Bright-eyed, clever, not scrolling every minute of every day that you read that you think that's it. Willing and eager to learn, and must be given the opportunities going forward, because they're the people who will make trains run on time in the future, who will look after passengers. We've got to find ways, I think, of making sure their experience is a rail experience and not just this bit of the supply chain experience. So I was with Rob White last week, the MD of the, and we agreed that we would share apprentices and they could spend time with us and our apprentices could spend time with them. And we should do that with operators as well, because the more holistic they get a view of the railway, then better. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, it does. Okay. Is that rounded? Because we are at the same time as we're renationalising rail reform, we're devolving as well. Is that rounded person,
but you kind of get
skill, isn't
a
it?
network rail and a train operating company. Their understanding of supply chain and how to engage and discuss with supply chain. And supply chain is a big part of the rest of the industry, right? Is how do we get a much better dialogue between those organisations?
That's my perfect segue for the question I was going to ask you, Andrea. So I know you previously from the infrastructure world. I'm quite looking at, I've been a bit of a jack of all trades and I've danced around a little bit of everything.
You're
Master
of
none. No. Should ask more questions. But like I say, relatively into the rolling stock world. So alongside I'd say the more transactional nature of procurement that you've observed in the rolling stock world, but then in the infrastructure world and in the bigger canvas, we're talking about partnership working and collaborative working. How do you think we're going to marry that pure transactionalness that we see in the rolling stock side versus the partnership that we wanted to emulate in culture?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I interviewed Mark at Crossrail around what was the single biggest piece of learning from Crossrail, and it was about starting with the system with that end in mind. Rolling stock it's funny, I was talking to a customer about this, and they still were thinking of rolling a train as a car. You know, you build it in a factory, you roll it out the factory, and you drive it away. I was speaking to our head of commissioning at Derby. So you're sitting in this big shed, and next to it, there's a little table with a guy at his laptop. And I expected to see something different. Of course I expected to see something different. And what he said to me was around a third of that train commissioning is now digital. It's not mechanical engineering anymore. It is digital. It's smart. We're more of a technology business than we are a mechanical engineering one. And that means the integration is the biggest challenge. Anybody will tell you the introduction of new rolling stock in the UK, the biggest challenge is the commissioning and the interoperability with the systems on the track. So for me, it's not just around the integration of the procurement. We have to integrate the technology and the solutions to make sure these trains, we can get them into service efficiently and they work for passengers. The reason they're so digital is to be efficient. You know, there's a guy somewhere in a room looking at a digital health hub can tell you how that train's performing. They can look at the data on that train. But the challenge is then of having that more of a digital and technology advanced infrastructure, rolling stock, is it's got to marry with the infrastructure. So an integrated approach absolutely is essential.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to Eleanor next, then we'll come back to you, Iain. But I just recall a statement you made, Tim. We all had prep calls for this session, and you said we can't be stuck in nostalgia. We've got to look at those new skills, and considering that you're so heavily involved in primary engineer as well, and you're from the operator side of the world as well, how would you advise that we take that skill concept, the skills needs, and we marry that into the strategy as well?
It's a really good question. I think for us, we need the strategy to be clear in terms of the infrastructure requirements. If what we're looking at and what our programme is putting forward is as transformational as we think it's going to be, then actually you need a strategy that not just tells you what that pipeline is going to look like, but it needs to talk about how it's going to get delivered. So when I mentioned earlier, we are working hand in glove with Network Rail. We're going through our Pace 1 design of our infrastructure at the moment. Again, that is going to create a very different relationship with the supply chain as a result. That's not been done typically with other rolling stock procurements. So for me, it's around not just about talking about outcomes, it's talking about how those outcomes are enabled through wider behavioural changes. And so if you're really going to work together and collaborate with the industry, I think that rolling stock manufacturers and infrastructure providers really need that certainty now so that you can understand, you know, we've got the spreadsheets telling us which bits of the network we want to electrify, where we need to increase our capacity. But it's also not even just within these four walls. It's working with National Grid, it's where we're going to put in new DNO connections, and it's actually being really honest about where this country needs to get to with getting this infrastructure right from the beginning. So for me, it's about being really open, really transparent, being much better at communicating where our programmes are getting to, and it's then giving organisations the time to retrain, reskill their colleagues so that they're ready for what we're going to put out to market in the coming years.
Thank you. And then to yourself, Iain, so one of the comments, one of the things you referred to as modal shift. You know, we've got to attract more people to travel by train. And since COVID, that shift in ridership has been distinct. The commuter income has fallen, but the rise of leisure travel has been phenomenal by comparison. And if we don't know how we're running the trains, you know, what mode, what traction are they going to be under? Are they going to be under wires or third rail or whatever it may be? And then recently the government responded to the challenge of boom and bust, going, well, boom and bust only really happens in the rolling stock part of the industry. How would you respond to that statement?
I think firstly, you don't just look at modal shift as passenger. It has to be freight as well. And that loops back to what I was saying in my earlier comments. The rolling stock strategy has to be part of the wider strategies. So look at, you know, to give one example, I took an Avanti train up to Glasgow last week, and we got stuck behind a couple of slow-moving freight trains because there wasn't the passing loops, we didn't have the electric locomotive for it, etc., so it delayed the whole network. So you need to look at what infrastructure investments you are going to look at to unlock capacity, what technological changes can unlock. We're just over the way there. There's the Class 93, the new tri-mode locomotive, which will be a game changer for many lines. So put the rolling stock strategy into that wider holistic planning. If GBR works, that's what it can do. But then you need to have the retail offer right to attract passengers. That will be different products for different markets. But the long-distance leisure market is probably the single biggest growth opportunity. If you want modal share in the Anglo-Scottish routes from Glasgow and Edinburgh to London, you need to make that an attractive offer. And you will, if you get the product right, you have the pricing right, people will come.
Yeah, and if we talk about that, looking at strategy in the widest sense, the government mantra of jobs, growth and housing, how can we make sure that this particular strategy plays it into the demand for economic growth, create new jobs even within the industry and support the housing market? We know Platform 4, for example, is trying to answer that as well.
I have seen some good signs from the government. It's Better Connected strategy that came out a month or so ago does start to address that place-based growth issue and how transport can be the unlocking of regeneration, economic development, and everything else. But it's still too silo thinking. Government is like that, I'm afraid. Yeah. And one of the inquiries I was running in the Select Committee before the election was to look at transport in that broader strategic policy landscape. Now, the election was called before we were able to produce a report and some recommendations. But it's a combination of, it's not just national governments, it will be increasingly the mayoral authorities and their growth strategies. It will be, as I said, a long-term funding envelope. The Treasury to start look at dynamic pricings rather than static, which is always a difficult thing for the Treasury to accept. But if we have that longer term vision, you will be able to realise that. It's not going to be easy. And GBR on its own will not be able to succeed. It needs to be given the authority and the autonomy to say, these are the objectives we've set for you. Yeah. Now you deliver. You work with whoever you need to work with to get that delivered. I fear we're still going to political, and I can say this now, I'm not one of them, political manipulation. For often very genuine reasons, but interference nonetheless.
Yeah. And how about, so this is an open question to all four of you. Another big message that's coming out of any of the GBR conversations is that of accountability. So we've got the talk of the inverted triangle, the inverted pyramid, and the accountability, and having both a hyper-local focus and a look at the national context. So that, the importance of accountability, how should that be reflected into an integrated rolling stock and infrastructure strategy?
Ooh. I'll start with this, right? Because I think as an industry, right, the railway has been challenging, to say the least, over that. Our service to passengers and the public has been truly awful, in my view, in the last numbers of years. And we talk about strategies and technologies and delivering this, delivering. I walked through here this morning. There's that many trains parked up here. It's unbelievable, right? And yet, you get on a cross-country train that's rammed, and people are falling over because the air conditioning's falling over because it's so rammed. And yet we can't get the trains out of here into the right place on the railway. And yet we have a discussion about what the new rolling stock is going to look like over the next 10 years. So I would say that as a collective, and I don't know where it starts, maybe it starts at the top with GBR, needs to say, you guys need to go and get the railway running on time. Because that's the starting point of all this. Can we run a railway on time? Can we run a railway safely? Can we clean the trains? We did that 10 or 15 years ago, and we don't do that today. And I think that we just need a goal that starts with that. In parallel with that, we can then start talking about this strategy, and that strategy. I don't know if that answers it, but I do get a little frustrated at us as an industry have just wasted £100 billion on HS2. Wait, it's a national scandal, right? Accountability, zero. I'm not seeing any accountability, either individually or a government or industry. None. Where's that? So I think we draw a line under if we can, but can we get the railway working on time? Can we get public confidence that we can run the railway on time? And can we start with that?
Who wants to follow that?
Whoa.
Well, I think I'd set aside any comment on High Speed 2 for a start. Yeah. It's the easiest thing in the world, isn't it? My husband's a builder, and I've spent years in construction. It's the easiest thing in the world for us to stand over there and say, they're doing it wrong. It is so hard to say, actually, I am accountable. I am responsible for passengers. And the cultural change that's required in our industry for everybody, it's my responsibility. I've got some colleagues here, it's Ben's responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. And I think we've got to feel that. We've got to really, really want that and really be prepared to stand up for our passengers and to stand there and say, yes, I will be accountable and I will be responsible. I want to hear that from leaders. I want to hear it. I've seen the ORR at the back there. We want to hear it from everybody. You know, too often I think the supply chain are blamed and finger pointing, or politicians, or we're all collectively responsible. And it has to start with all of us being accountable. So perhaps that's something we can take away from today, because I certainly do feel accountable, and I will make sure that in everything I do, I'm trying to create a better railway for passengers.
Well, I'm going to jump in there, because there's a point I really often make. We are all, I presume all of us are all working in one way or another in the railway industry. We are our own customers. So the better we can do, the efficiencies we can drive, the comfort we can increase, we're making it better, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. But it is taxpayer efficiency, isn't it? Which I think was something you referred to, Iain.
I think there is a great opportunity at the moment with the legislation to set up GBR, say, midway through its parliamentary passage, to lock in that accountability. I don't think it's there at the moment. If you look at the duties of GBR, it's a fairly woolly have regard to the efficiency in spending public money. It's too vague. I would like to see a more precise value for money duty. Now, when I say value for money, I don't mean do it the cheapest way possible. It's looking holistically at what needs to be done, which might be a very expensive option, but in the long term generates better value for money. For rolling stock, that doesn't mean just, well, we need to procure all these shiny new trains, is your point. Look at the cascading down. Where can we maximise the life value of an asset through refurbishment, redeployment, whatever it is? And GBR should be obliged in all its procurement to publish that value for money statement and have it properly audited. And the head of GBR, whoever he or she is accountable to Parliament, to the ORR, and if they don't deliver, run out and someone else comes in. But hand in hand goes with them having the autonomy to deliver what's expected of them, but then be held accountable for it if it doesn't work.
Thank you. And Eleanor, you're arguably the closest one of all of us to the customer, be that passenger or freight, but in your case, passenger. So what's accountability for you?
Well, I want to echo what Iain just said, actually, in terms of value for money, because I'm concerned from a business case perspective that the strategy may end up being a vehicle for essentially driving value for money and looking at this essentially on a cost basis to say what's the most effective outcome for the industry within FP1. And the concern is that when we're talking, we've got Iain today with, from our tech team, we're debating at the moment, we need a train, for example, that's a 125 mile an hour battery train so that we can get it on the main line and we're not clogging up capacity. We're not going to impact on our freight customers. We're not going to reduce the amount of paths we can identify in the future. And it's around how you make the case to Treasury and how you make the case to the decision makers. But I would say you do need, on accountability, you need a lot of people around you to make the argument. So, for example, on things like this sentiment around no additional units, essentially one in, one out, we need to grow our network. We connect into Gatwick and Heathrow. We serve some of the most busiest parts of the network, even Cornwall and Devon, where you've got metros coming forward, and the growth there is exponential. So we really need to make sure that we're accountable to customers, but in a way that gives this rolling stock strategy the funding behind it to actually deliver and not end up kind of cutting our cloth accordingly and then driving, I think, poor outcomes for the longer term.
Thank you. I'm going to come to you all now. Do we have any questions in the audience? Excellent. Okay, so the gentleman in the second row was first. If you could say who you are, where you're from, please. And if your question's for everybody or a specific person.
Thank you. Hello, I'm George. I don't work on trains, but I love trains. From model railways to big ones. Questions broadly for GWR on the IT programme, maybe your purview, but do you have any idea of whether you'll refresh the IT programme and look more towards sort of what TransPennine have done, maybe with comfier seats, a slightly more relaxed sort of space interior in the future?
Yeah, so we're only just scoping out our early designs on that mid-life refresh. So I can't give any more detail at this stage in terms of kind of how significant we're going to make those changes. But I think what you'll see are things like addressing comfort issues rather than kind of structural internal changes as well. I think it's just, you know, again, something to get right for the strategy going forwards. But when you're the first receiver of a new fleet, that in itself, you know, you get on an Avanti train or further on and you see where those changes have been made. One thing I say is that the more time you spend on the customer specification, if we are going to get frameworks with standardization across different kind of passenger types or commuter types or, you know, whoever it is, we've got to make sure that we get it right now and we don't bake in really big problematic issues for the industry later on.
Thank you. Any more questions? The lady down at the front.
Hello everyone, Samantha Pan from Bowes as a senior project manager. So my question is, as a tier 1 contractor, and we feel we have a lot of work we want winning, but I can see the bridge gap between the suppliers and the client. So my question is, how can SMEs and the new entrants engage more effectively?
Not something I'm interested in at all. I'm going to go to you for that one to start with.
I think it's a real challenge, right? And it's never been effectively solved, right? You've tried for a long time. I sit on the rear board as well. It's a thing that we've got to keep going around and working through. I actually personally think that the larger organisations have a responsibility to help the SMEs along with that. And I do have a view that we need to maybe change how the industry forums that talk directly to government and the industry bodies so that it can have a more representative view of it. Because it goes deep, right? Because it is about not only what technologies are available, and we just said there we need to standardise this, that and the other on the vehicle side of it. That needs a deep discussion with rolling stock developers and manufacturers because those things are developed on a global basis. And when that's done in isolation in a GWR or a Southwest, you come up with an expensive answer maybe that's not been developed, that puts risk then into when you then commission the train. It doesn't work as well as it might have done if it had been a standard product right the way through. So I think there's a lot of activity, a lot of work to do with SMEs to bring them through larger organisations to have a direct, because there's a lot of capability to come through that. So I think the first thing is for the governments, for the industry, I guess just a mindset shift that the technology to run the railway in the main comes from the supply chain. It's out there, the answers to some of the questions. How do you make freight trains go faster? I can tell you how to make freight trains go faster tomorrow, right? That won't get in the way of passenger trains. And that can be part of the mix of what's required. But it's not because it's not thought of in the FTO or the DFT because they don't know. So I think we've got a lot of conversation so we can educate each other a little bit more about some of the constraints that are around.
And I think if I can interject into that, because it's a conversation I was actually having this morning outside of the conference programme. We all agree that we need a visible pipeline and we need a certainty of pipeline. But what we don't get is take a really stupid number, we've got £10 to spend instead of £100 to spend, and we're going to spend it in 2 months' time, not in a week's time, or in a year's time, not 5 years' time. So I think just some clarity on how much we've got to spend when, because then to support either the tier ones, the system integrators, and their own sub-supply chains, it's just a real honesty then around what work is coming when, because then you can support your people according to those timelines. You can bring your apprentices in to suit when you're going to have these ups in work.
You can then size your factories to the right size, right? You get the right number of people. Forecasting and what's happening over the next 2 or 3 years is essential to manufacturers or overhaulers or anybody else.
But then if we do get to think beyond that traditional 5-year funding envelope, the trains are designed to run for, 30, 40, 50 years in reality?
Yeah.
So we need to think in that long term anyway.
I think there are some practical steps you can take as well. We're nothing without our supply chain as a business. We employ lots of people, thousands of people. That's where a big chunk of our spend goes. But something like 700 million last year went to the supply chain. Very large proportion of that were SMEs. So, in excess, I think it was more than 1,200 organisations and businesses are part of our supply chain. It is incredibly complex when you're a business at that kind of that end. Our procurement departments are large. We have people, I've met people whose responsibility is, just to procure carpet and furnishings. So trying to find the right person is the hardest thing with bigger organisations. So if you meet someone like me, and don't be frightened to give me a card, because I know how hard this is. I've been in your shoes. I've been an SME. And I will make sure it gets to our procurement team, and they'll respond to you and at least tell you who is the category manager for your service or your supply. And then you can follow up with that conversation. Persistence is everything, absolutely everything. But I'm happy to make those connections because we can't do it without you. Okay.
Thank you. Next question, the gentleman at the back. Oh, sorry, then there's one at the front from this gentleman. Sorry, sir. Come to you next.
Hello, Andrew Smith, one of the heads of audit from DFTO. So this is maybe a question for Iain, just sort of a comment on rolling stock in this country. In most countries in Europe, there's some sort of priority provider. You have Alstom in France, Siemens in Germany, Hitachi in Japan. We don't really have that, and I don't think there's any sense that we're heading in that direction. Is that a good thing, that we're going to remain open and varied, or a bad thing that we lose out on the symbiotic relationship of having like a almost semi-state supported provider a la Brel back in the day?
So open market on rolling stock versus state build.
I would lean towards the open market.
You've dropped again.
Oh, sorry. I would lean towards the open market. And we shouldn't just look at rolling stock manufacture in this country as purely a domestic endeavour. Because I remember when we were looking at the Alstom, not just Alstom, but the general rolling stock issue a couple of years ago, Alstom were looking at having their new, one of their new platforms centred in the UK. That would be both for the UK market and internationally. Yeah. So I think having that, I tend to believe competition is good, that you will have better innovation. Yeah. You will encourage new technologies, new ideas to feed through. Nothing in life is absolutist. So of course you have to have a mix of the two. But I think we will be well served by having a vibrant market. We can't have overcapacity, and we probably have overcapacity at the moment. And that's why my earlier point about making these strategies genuinely long-term, so you can smooth out those peaks and troughs in demand, and a mix of new rolling stock and refurbishments. So you can have the appropriate scale of industry in this country, but then have genuine open competition. I think that could be healthy.
Thank you. Right, the gentleman down at the front here. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, there's Mark Sullivan, former Transport Users Consultative Committee. Picking up on what Mr. Stewart says, if his successors were walking through here, they'd order an immediate inquiry by the Transport Select Committee into why there are so many trains just parked, not being used, modern ones, and there are also, in other places, diesel units all stacked up. So is the strategy for rolling stock not to make use of the ones we've got? And there's no Roscoe people here, but it raises a big question for politicians, is how come there's so many trains not being used? If you go to Scotland, you know, there are lots of fresh air, trains, nice trains, but lots of them. There's a huge over-ordering. And how did that happen? Do you remember trying to tackle this matter when you were committee? It's got worse in the last 2 years.
Well, we did have an inquiry on rolling stock back in 23, I think it was, off the top of my head. And some of the conclusions are in what I've just said. ScotRail is interesting because I say I sit on the board of Transport Scotland, and we are in the process of procuring a new suburban fleet, but that will take some time. In the meantime, we've got trains running in the Glasgow network that I travelled on when I was at school, and that wasn't yesterday, that was 40 years ago. Meanwhile, just over the way, there's trains that are 15, 20 years old. Now, there must be a better way of being able, in the interim even, to use those trains and retire the very old ones. And your point earlier about those being the most expensive to maintain. Was it palliative care for DMU? I love that. So this is the potential advantage of GBR, that you can have that more holistic planning. But as I say, it cannot exist in isolation from the wider objectives.
And I think we should see it as a fundamentally good thing that DFTO and GBR are taking forward the strategy, because that's how you eradicate those kinds of issues in the first place. So, credit where it's due, they've been really good at engaging with us as an operator, really wanting to work with us closely. So at least that is a benefit in terms of where we're now headed as an industry with these issues that we've seen before.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to?
Just come back to the point I think you made on where rolling stock comes from. And it's not quite true, the thing you said, that Alstom don't have competition in France, because they do have competition in France. But rolling stock is made of a series of subsystems, right? Braking systems, door system, bogie systems, this, that. The supply chain and the manufacturing supply chain and the technology supply chain of that has been decimated over about the last 30 or 40 years in the UK, because nobody cared where that technology came from. Which meant that the Paris government did care where things were made. So it made sure it maintained technology and traction equipment and other equipment. That was never done in the UK. So I do think there is an argument to say, how do we encourage some of that technology, the technology bit of it, where you assemble trains in the end, you can do that relatively quickly. But the technology that goes into those trains, I think you need to put a bit more thought of how do we get the manufacturing, the design and the engineering of that capability back in this country. Because if you don't get that back in this country, you don't really get the full engineering capability to be able to look after it properly for 30 years.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Thank you. Right, we've got time for one more question.
Hi, Neil Bates from Creative Design Transport. I'm known to you, Lucy, but not the others. It's ultimately a question for Eleanor. I think the whole thing about the rolling stock and infrastructure strategy is a great thing, but how are you able to guarantee the voice of the customer and customer experience in what you're doing? Are you able to embrace that, and is that feedback going back into the strategy?
It's a really interesting point. So a couple of areas in terms of where the customer really matters to us in those touch points. So clearly we're not at our outline business case stage yet, so we can't go out to market. I have to be slightly careful with what I say. But even what we've been doing in rooms far away from here is working with key partners, so the likes of Gatwick Airport and local authorities, to actually co-design what the interior of that train is going to look like. So we've had customer experts from different organisations who will have a stake in the future of this rolling stock to say, actually, this is exactly what's going to work for the type of passenger we're working with. And credit to Iain and the team who have been doing this work for months now to really reinforce what that should look like. There's also a piece around working with our data insights team to make sure that when we're looking at our customer market in aggregate, we're taking those insights. We've also worked with East Rail in Chiltern and done that really thoroughly. But it goes back to the point you made, Lucy, about growth, housing, jobs. And I think this is where our programme has always been designed to generate growth. So to think about your timetable. So are you specifying the right timetable for the kind of market or the kind of customer behaviours you might see in the future? I mentioned earlier, this year we're running our overnight trains to Gatwick Airport as a trial. We need to get those kinds of things adopted as part of the programme to make sure we've got the right fleet. I'd also shout out to Chiltern's Mark V business case, which looked at all of that housing growth coming through near those stations, and it managed to get that support to say we need this new fleet to accommodate that future growth. So for us, the customer is absolutely the heart of it. It's now our job with our stakeholders and our partners to really shout about what our programme can do and can enable and get that right from the start of it. The journey's going to be really long. It's a really difficult challenge, but at least we're hopefully looking at a policy framework coming forward in September, which will at least give us the right kind of guardrails and parameters to have confidence to take our plans forward.
Thank you. We are to time, but I'm going to close with one final question that I'm going to pose to each of you, because it is very easy for us all to descend into grumble. I think we've got a proclivity for that. So I'd like you to each think of what are you most proud of what we have already achieved in the rail industry that you would like to see carried forward into future strategy and long-term planning.
Look, I think it's a great industry, right? I've spent my life in this industry, so and we achieved massive things over the last 20, 30 years in doubling passenger numbers, for example, on the West Coast Main Line. So we know how to grow railways and grow passenger numbers on railways. We have it's in our DNA how to do that. But we've really got to come together from the operators, from the supply chain, through to the politicians, and make sure we get that right. And then focus on the passengers, but focus on let's start with getting trains running on time, making sure they're clean, and then reliable and safe. And if we do that, then we can get on to the next phases. Thank you.
Andrea?
I guess fundamentally an industry is nothing without its people. It's just incredible. The guy I spoke to you about commissioning, he's third generation at our site in Derby. The people I meet every day, whether it's fantastic apprentices or graduates, or whether it's people from our customer organisations really committed to our customers, those people are what make our industry. And I think we've all got to be proud of that, because we're all going to do this. You know, we quite often point the finger to government or politicians, but we're all going to make the change happen, and we're going to create a better future for all of us. And I can't see an industry that's more capable of doing that with the skills that we've got and the people we've got.
Thank you. Iain?
I think there are lots of things we can be proud of, and we get procurement right. So look at Greater Anglia's new fleet that services Stansted Airport. And caveat, I do work at Stansted Airport. But those trains are fantastic.
Yeah.
They are future-looking in terms of their capacity. So we do get it right, but we just need to take that best practice and make it work for the whole. It's too atomised at the moment. So there is that talent, ambition, and expertise there. Just needs to be packaged up and work for the common overall good.
Thank you. And finally up.
I'm going to go with a bit of a catch-all, which is private sector innovation. Over the probably last summer, I was really privileged to watch the team from Viva Rail, now Great Western, work to get that train into operation. And the gamble and the investment needed right at the start, all the way through to this team of really expert people, spending their days on the train. You've had a guy dialing in from Amsterdam, literally monitoring every day. You had engineering apprentices. You had incredibly skilled managers, day to day. And the point is that unless that team right from the start had taken a gamble with some old D-stock, we would never have had the level of insight and data and understanding of a battery train's capability to really strengthen our credibility as Great Western. And if you go from the likes of Viva Rail all the way up to the big manufacturers proposing BMUs, without that innovation, we can't make the right choices that I fundamentally believe are the best for our customer in the future. So Steve White uses that word ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I love that phrase because to me it's how do we, as a sort of semi-public sector organisation now, work with that ecosystem to give that strength and that confidence about the supply chain to make sure we've got the right outcomes, but giving that confidence that we're not going to change our mind later down the line, we're not going to buy an MMU. It's all the steps we've got to take, but it's the innovation itself that is getting us to the point where we can make the decisions, and that's amazing.
Thank you. I'll draw it to close there. So to conclude, and just reflecting on what you've all just said there, it's doing what we do well and carrying on doing it, whilst we're celebrating the people, us in the room, and everyone that we can bring along with us. Celebrate the skill and the capability we've got. Don't atomise the good points. Share them. Actually put them in an atomizer, and then be bold. We've got the capability to bring great innovation in. And let's not just look at very, very restrictive business case scenarios. Let's take some risks that's not necessarily the dangerous commercial risk. Okay. Thank you very much. Everybody can have a massive round of applause for the panel. Thank you.